The phone buzzed at 2:47 a.m. in the Bandidos MC clubhouse. Tank, the chapter president, was reviewing security footage when his personal cell lit up with an unknown number. Most late-night calls meant trouble, but something about this one felt different. The caller ID showed a local area code, and Tank's gut told him to answer. "Hello?" Tank's gravelly voice cut through the silence. What he heard next would haunt him for weeks. A young woman's voice, barely above a whisper, trembling with terror. "Please, someone gave me your number. They said you help people. We're not safe. He's coming back and the police won't do anything." The line crackled with interference, but the desperation was crystal clear. Tank sat up straighter, his military training kicking in. 20 years in the Marines had taught him to recognize genuine fear, and this woman was drowning in it. "Slow down, darling. Tell me your name and where you are." But before she could respond fully, he heard a crash in the background, followed by a man's angry shouting. The woman's breathing became rapid, panicked. "He's here," she whispered. 1247 Oak Street, apartment 3B. Please, if something happens to us." The line went dead. Tank stared at his phone for exactly 3 seconds before springing into action. He'd heard enough desperate pleas in war zones to know when someone's life hung in the balance. This wasn't a prank or a mistake. Tank grabbed his leather vest and keys, his mind already calculating the 15-minute ride to Oak Street. He'd seen too much suffering in his lifetime to ignore a cry for help, especially from someone brave enough to reach out to strangers. If you believe in protecting the innocent, hit that subscribe button and join our community of people who stand up for what's right. Tank's boots thundered across the clubhouse floor as he reached for the emergency horn. 3 long blasts echoed through the building, the signal every Bandido knew meant immediate assembly. Within minutes, brothers emerged from back rooms, some pulling on their cuts, others already reaching for their keys. The urgency in Tank's movements told them everything they needed to know. "We got a situation," Tank announced, as 8 members gathered in the main room. Woman and possibly kids in immediate danger. Oak Street, apartment 3B. Police apparently won't respond. He didn't need to explain further. The Brotherhood had an unwritten code about protecting the vulnerable, especially when the system failed them. It wasn't about playing hero. It was about being human. Diesel, the club's enforcer, stepped forward first. At 6'4", with arms covered in military tattoos, he'd seen his share of domestic violence cases during his time as a bouncer. "What's the threat level?" he asked, already checking his phone for the fastest route. Behind him, Wrench and Bones were pulling on their riding gloves, their faces set with determination. Snake, the club's youngest prospect, hesitated near the door. "Shouldn't we call the cops first? I mean, what if we're walking into something bigger?" Tank understood the kid's concern, but experience had taught him that sometimes official channels move too slowly. "Son, when someone's in immediate danger, you don't wait for bureaucracy. You act." The rumble of 8 Harley engines firing up simultaneously shattered the night silence. As they pulled out of the parking lot in formation, Tank couldn't shake the terror he'd heard in that woman's voice. Whatever they were riding into, they'd face it together, just as they always had. The convoy of motorcycles cut through empty streets like a steel river, their headlights piercing the pre-dawn darkness. Tank led the formation, his mind racing through possible scenarios. Domestic violence calls were unpredictable. He'd responded to enough of them during his military police days to know that desperation made people dangerous. But the alternative, doing nothing, wasn't an option. As they approached Oak Street, Tank raised his left hand, signaling the group to slow down. The last thing they needed was to announce their arrival with roaring engines. 8 bikes gradually reduced their speed, the distinctive Harley rumble dropping to a low growl. Tank's tactical mind was already assessing the neighborhood. Older apartment complex, limited street lighting, multiple escape routes. The building at 1247 Oak Street looked tired and neglected. Peeling paint, broken security gate, and a parking lot filled with potholes painted a picture of a place where people ended up when they had few choices. Tank killed his engine 2 buildings away, and the others followed suit. The sudden silence felt heavy, broken only by the ticking of cooling metal and distant traffic. "Diesel, Wrench, take the back exit," Tank whispered, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to command. "Bones, Snake, watch the front. Nobody goes in or out without us knowing." Rest of you, with me. The men moved with practiced efficiency, their leather cuts creaking softly as they took positions around the building. Tank approached the main entrance, his heart rate steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. Apartment 3B meant third floor, and he could already see a flickering light behind one of the upper windows. Whatever was happening up there, they were about to find out. The woman's desperate voice echoed in his memory as he tested the front door. The front door hung slightly ajar, its lock mechanism clearly forced. Tank's jaw tightened as he pushed it open carefully, motioning for Hammer and Roadkill to follow. The building's interior smelled of stale cigarettes and desperation, with flickering fluorescent lights casting eerie shadows on cracked walls. Each step on the worn carpet seemed to echo despite their efforts to move quietly. As they climbed toward the third floor, muffled voices became audible from above. A man's voice, slurred and aggressive, punctuated by what sounded like furniture being thrown around. Tank's military training kicked in fully now, controlled breathing, heightened awareness, ready for anything. Behind him, his brothers moved with surprising stealth for men their size. On the second-floor landing, they paused. The voices were clearer now, and what they heard made their blood run cold.
"You called someone, didn't you?" The man was shouting. "Who'd you call, Sarah? Answer me!" The sound of a slap echoed down the stairwell, followed by a child's crying. Tank's hands clenched into fists, but he forced himself to remain tactical. "2 kids, at least 1 adult male suspect," Tank whispered into his radio to the brothers positioned outside. Domestic violence in progress. He'd seen enough combat to know that rushing in blindly could escalate the situation and put the victims in greater danger. But they also couldn't wait too long. The man's voice was becoming increasingly violent. As they reached the third floor, apartment 3B's door came into view. It was slightly open, and through the gap, they could see overturned furniture and broken glass. Tank made a quick decision, knowing that sometimes the difference between life and death came down to seconds. He approached the door, his brothers flanking him on either side, ready to act. Tank's knuckles connected with the door frame in 3 firm, authoritative knocks. "Sarah, this is Tank. You called me." The apartment fell silent except for muffled sobbing. After a moment, heavy footsteps approached the door, and a man's voice, thick with alcohol and rage, responded, "Get the hell away from my door or I'll call the cops on you, freaks." "Sir, we're just here to check on Sarah and the kids," Tank replied, his voice steady but carrying an unmistakable edge of authority. "Why don't you step outside and we can talk man to man?" Behind the door, they could hear the woman's voice, barely audible. "Please, just leave him alone. He'll hurt the children." The desperation in her plea only strengthened Tank's resolve. The door suddenly swung open, revealing a man in his 30s, clearly intoxicated, with bloodshot eyes and clenched fists. "You bikers think you run this town," he snarled, swaying slightly. Behind him, Tank could see a young woman holding 2 small children, her left cheek bearing a fresh red mark. The apartment was destroyed, chairs overturned, pictures shattered, clear signs of prolonged violence. "Nobody wants trouble here," Tank said, stepping slightly forward but keeping his hands visible. "But we're not leaving until we know Sarah and these kids are safe." The man's eyes darted between Tank and the 2 brothers flanking him, clearly calculating his odds. For a moment, the hallway hung in tense silence, everyone aware that the next few seconds would determine how this ended. What happened next would test everything the Bandidos believed about protection, brotherhood, and doing what's right when the system fails. Sarah clutched her children tighter, her eyes moving between her abuser and these leather-clad strangers who'd answered her desperate call for help. "Look, brother," Tank said, deliberately using the word to establish connection rather than confrontation. "I can see you're hurting too. Whatever's going on here, there's got to be a better way to handle it than scaring your family." The man's aggressive posture wavered slightly, confusion flickering across his features. Tank had learned in the military that sometimes the most dangerous people were the most broken ones. Sarah stepped forward slightly, still holding her children, but finding courage in the presence of help. He's not my husband," she said quietly. "He's my ex-boyfriend. He won't leave us alone. I got a restraining order, but he keeps coming back." The man, identified now as Marcus, laughed bitterly.
Restraining order? That piece of paper doesn't mean nothing. We got history, Sarah. You can't just throw that away. Tank exchanged glances with Hammer and Roadkill. This was more complex than a simple domestic dispute. This was stalking, harassment, and violation of a court order. Marcus, is it? Tank addressed the man directly. I understand you got feelings for Sarah, but look around, man. Look at what this is doing to those kids. Is this really the man you want to be? For a moment, Marcus seemed to deflate. The alcohol, exhaustion, and confrontation with 3 imposing bikers had drained his false bravado. I just don't know how to let go, he admitted, his voice cracking. She was everything to me. Tank recognized the pain of a man who'd lost his way, but that didn't excuse terrorizing a woman and her children. I get it, brother. Losing someone hurts like hell, Tank said, his voice softening slightly. But this ain't love anymore, this is fear, and those kids don't deserve to live in fear. You don't want to be remembered as the man who scared children, do you? If you're moved by stories of people finding strength in their darkest moments, share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. Marcus looked at the children for the first time that night, really looked at them. The little girl, maybe 5 years old, was pressed against her mother's leg, her eyes wide with terror. The boy, slightly older, stood protectively in front of his sister, his small hands clenched in fists, just like his mother's abuser. The sight seemed to break something inside Marcus, and he stumbled backward. I never wanted to scare them, Marcus whispered, the fight finally leaving his body. Tank stepped carefully into the apartment, gesturing for his brothers to maintain their positions. Kids, you're safe now, he said gently, his rough voice somehow comforting. Nobody's going to hurt you or your mama anymore. The transformation from intimidating biker to gentle protector was remarkable to witness. Sarah finally spoke up, her voice stronger now. Marcus, you need help, real help. Not just for me, but for yourself. This isn't who you used to be. Tank nodded approvingly. She was finding her strength, which was crucial for long-term healing. There's programs, man, Tank added, addressing Marcus. Veterans services, addiction counseling, anger management, but you got to want it. The next hour involved careful coordination with local police who arrived once the immediate danger had passed. Tank made sure Sarah had contact information for women's shelters and legal advocacy groups. The Bandidos also left their own contact information, not as vigilantes, but as community members who cared about their neighbors' safety. As dawn broke over Oak Street, Marcus was taken into custody for violating the restraining order. He went quietly, seeming almost relieved that the cycle had been broken. Sarah and her children were safe, but Tank knew their real healing would take time, support, and the kind of community protection that went beyond any single rescue. 3 months later, Tank received a letter at the clubhouse. Sarah's handwriting was neat and careful. Dear Tank and the Bandidos MC, I wanted you to know that Emma and Jake are doing great in school now. We moved to a safer place, and Marcus is getting the help he needs in a treatment program. Thank you for showing my children that there are good people in the world who help others. The letter made its way around the clubhouse, each brother reading it with quiet satisfaction. This was why they'd formed their brotherhood in the first place, not for the leather and chrome, but for the bonds that made them stronger together than apart. Snake, the young prospect who'd questioned their methods that night, had grown into understanding what it meant to be a protector. Tank kept the letter in his desk drawer, along with others like it. Over the years, the Bandidos had responded to dozens of similar calls, sometimes preventing violence, sometimes just providing a safe presence until professional help arrived. They never sought publicity for these actions, understanding that real heroism happened in the shadows when no cameras were rolling. The motorcycle club had evolved from its rough origins into something more nuanced. Men who'd found purpose in protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. They weren't vigilantes or outlaws, but rather community members who understood that sometimes official help moved too slowly for people in immediate danger. Their leather cuts had become symbols of safety for those who needed it most. As Tank locked up the clubhouse that evening, he reflected on the responsibility that came with their reputation. Every action they took reflected on the brotherhood as a whole, and every person they helped made their community a little bit safer. The phone call still came in the middle of the night, and the Bandidos still answered them, because that's what brothers do for their community. If this story inspired you to believe in the power of people helping people, hit that like button and let us know in the comments about a time when someone unexpected came to your aid when you needed it most.